Today we're talking about slope and graphing. So slope is the constant rate of change of the rise, which is the vertical movement, to the run, which is the horizontal movement. Slope is represented by the letter M. So it is the rise over the run. So anytime you have a whole number, you place a 1 in the denominator, just like we do when we multiply and divide fractions, because lonely numbers need a denominator of 1. So let's look at different kinds of slopes, and we'll talk more about this rise over run thing. So a positive slope rises from left to right. So if I read it from left to right, like I do a book, you can see how this is pointing up. So this is a positive slope. You can see in my fraction or in my whole number, all of the numbers here are positive. I don't have any negative numbers. You're going up. So that's a positive slope. You can also draw lines on either side of it, and you can look to see what letter it makes. Well, this doesn't make any letter. It kind of makes a backwards N. So that's how you know that one's positive. Because if you look at a negative slope, like this one, if I read it from left to right, or I draw the end lines, you can see that that makes the letter N for a negative slope. And if you read it from left to right, you can see that the arrow points down. So that's another thing that tells you it's negative. If you look at the slopes as a fraction or as a whole number, they have negative signs. So this is a negative slope. So positive points up, negative points down. Now we also have two other kinds of slope. We have a flat slope, which is a zero slope. It is a horizontal line. So all the y values are going to be the same because all the y values are the same on the coordinate plane. It goes in a straight line and there's no vertical change. So this is what we refer to as a HOI. It is a horizontal line with a zero slope and y equals a number because it cuts across the y-axis at whatever that intercept is. So when it has a horizontal line with a zero slope, we refer to it as a HOI. Now the other slope that we have is a vertical slope. And you can see it doesn't have a slope because I can't drive a car on it. It's just vertical. All the x values are going to be the same and it falls off a cliff. So this line, because it's a vertical line, we call this one a VUX. It is a vertical line with an undefined slope and x equals the number because it crosses the x-axis and it has an x-intercept. So we have a HOI and we have a VUX, and then we have a positive slope and a negative slope. So HOI is horizontal, VUX is vertical. So let's look. Identify the slope as positive, negative, zero, or undefined. So the zero slope, if we look up here, zero slope is the HOI, and an undefined slope would be a VUX for the U for undefined and the O for zero. So let's look at the first one together. It's going up from left to right. You can also use the trick, can I make the letter N? No. So this one is a positive slope. Now if I look at the next one, going from left to right, this arrow is pointing down. And I can also add those end lines and that one makes the letter N, so that is a negative slope. Now here's where things get fun. This line, does it have an undefined slope or does it have zero slope? That's the question you have to ask yourself. This one has zero slope. It's perfectly flat. The car won't roll anywhere. So this is what we call a HOI. It is a horizontal line with a zero slope and a Y-intercept at 2. Okay. Let's look at number 6. Or number 4, I'm sorry. If I read this one, it is just a vertical line. That is your VUX, a vertical line with an undefined slope with an X-intercept. This one is an X-intercept at -2. Number 5. It's a horizontal line, so this one is a HOI. Horizontal line, zero slope, Y-intercept at 3. This one, if I go from left to right, goes up. It also does not make the letter N, so this is a positive. I want you to pause, and I want you to do 7, 8, and 9 on your own. So this one is a positive. It goes up from left to right. This one is a vertical. So this is a VUX, a vertical line with an undefined slope with an X equals an X-intercept at 4 for this one. And then this last one, it goes down from left to right, and I can also make the letter N. So this is a negative slope. All right, so let's talk more about that rise over run. So it says from the point on the graph, move the slope and repeat as much as possible until the graph runs out. So we are going to do rise over run. So what that means is when we're looking at slope, remember lonely whole numbers go over 1. I'm going to rise 2 and run 1. So rise 2, run 1. And I'm going to start at this dot. It's a little high. I'm going to go up 2, 1, 2, and then I'm going to run positive 1. And remember, these are your positives, these are your negatives. Positives are at the top, negatives are at the bottom. So, I'll use my highlighter. So I'm going to rise 2, run 1. There's my point. Now I'm going to go from there again. Rise 2, run 1. And there's my point. You at least need to have 2 points to be able to plot a graph. Then I would like for you to use a nice pretty straight edge and draw a line. Make sure your arrows are off of your graph. And if we look at our slope, we had no negatives in our slope, so our slope is positive. Okay, if we look at the next one, whole numbers go over 1. Rise, -3, run 1. And I apologize, this dot's a little off as well. Now, because we're rising -3, instead of going up, it's a negative, so I actually have to go down. Down 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I go positive 1, so it's right there. Down 3, 1, 2, 3 over 1. And then now I'm out of spaces to go. So I'm going to draw a nice, pretty straight line as best as I can get it off your graph. And you can see from your slope it was negative, and this line has a negative slope. Now the next one's a little tricky. We're always going to give negatives to the numerator. So that's rise -1, run +2. So we're going to start at our dot. we're going to rise -1, but instead of rising -1, it's negative, so I have to go down. And I'm going to run 2. 1, 2. Now normally we always use negative numerators, but you could also make a negative denominator. So you could have 1 over -2. So that'd be rise 1 and run -2. You can give it to either number, it doesn't matter, but you have to only give it to 1. So I could essentially rise +1, run -2. And I could plot that there. Either one works. And then draw a nice pretty straight line as best as you can get it. And if you look, that's a negative slope, so it is a negative line. All right. So for this one, you actually have to plot your point and then move your slope. So let's start by plotting our point. So we have +2, 1, 2, +1, +1. So there's my point. I'm going to rise 1, run 3. Remember, this is x and y, walk and fly, and slope is rise over run, so don't get those too confused. So I'm going to rise 1, run 3. 1, 2, 3. Now, the same thing holds true for this one. I can change the signs of this, and it says instead of going up, I can go down. And instead of to the right, I could go to the left. So I could do the opposite slope of this. I could go down 1, 1, 2, 3, and I could put my point here. Because they would all be on the same line. But if I look at it, my slope is positive, and that line does have a positive slope. Okay, my next one is at -4. 1, 2, 3, 4, -2. Walk and fly, x and y. Remember, whole numbers go over 1, so this is rise over run. So rise -2, so it means I'm going down 2, +1. I could also do the opposite of that. I could go up 2, 1, 1, 2, and then to the left 1. They're all going to be on the same line. And that one has a negative slope, because if I read it from left to right, it points down. Okay, last one we're going to do together. We have -1, +3. Now, negative numerators, so rise -1, run 2. So I have down 1, right 2. Down 1, right 2. And I could go one more time. Down 1, right 2. And then draw a line as best as you can to connect all those dots. All right. So what I want for you to do is I want you to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll check those together. And here are your answers for 1 and 2. You can see in the orange here, I did the backwards of that slope so I could get another point, but if you didn't, that is perfectly okay. And then the last two, the number 3 was a horizontal line with a 0 slope and a Y-intercept. You can see the Y-intercept is here at 2. And then this number 4 is undefined. It's a vertical line with an undefined slope and an x-intercept of 3. All right, so I want you to pause here. I want you to plot the points and move the slopes for numbers 5 through 10. And then you can unpause your video when you're ready to check your work. And here are your answers. For 5 and 6, you can see in the orange I moved the backward slope for number 6. For 7 and 8. And then also for 9 and 10. And you can see in orange where I moved the backward slope of what they provided me. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about is finding slope in the y-intercept from an equation. So this is an equation of a line, and this is y-intercept form. So I have a y equals, the m is my slope. That's your change with rise over run. Then you have your x coordinate that you can substitute in. And then you have your b. Your b is your y-intercept. That is where your line will cross your y-axis. So this x and the y here represent an ordered pair that you were substituting in from last class. You were plugging in the x, getting out the y. So all we're doing for this activity is we are going to name the slope and the y-intercept for each linear equation. And it's just, if you want to, you can rewrite y equals mx plus b. M will always be slope. B will always be your y-intercept. So m is 2. Y-intercept is 5. So it's going to cross the x-axis at, cross the y-axis at 0, 5, if I were to plot that point. And it would have a slope of 2. That's all this means. We're just looking at the linear equation and figuring out what is the slope and what is the y-intercept. So if I have y equals mx plus b again, my slope is 2/3. But my y-intercept, which is what that b is, it's not a positive, it's actually a negative 6. Remember, the sign has to go with the number. And then if I look at the last one, y equals mx plus b. M is my slope, so this is my slope here. So it's negative 3/5. And my b, which is my y-intercept, is positive 8. Okay. So I want you to try, let's start with the first row. Try the first 3. Remember, you're using y equals mx plus b. Pull out the slope, which is m, and b, which is your y-intercept. So go ahead, you're doing 4, 5, and 6. So for this one, your slope was negative 3, your y-intercept was 2. For number 5, your slope should have been half, and you didn't add anything here, so your your y-intercept is 0. Your slope for number 6 was negative 7, and your y-intercept is negative 1. So go ahead and try the rest of those on that page. And unpause when you're ready to see your answers. So here are your answers for 7 through 12. And all you were doing was pulling out that slope, which was right in front of the x, and the y-intercept, which is in the back. Okay, let's look at the last page real quick. I want you to try the first line. Remember, anytime you have a variable, always squeeze in a coefficient of 1. So go ahead, try the first line. So there's your answers for the first line. Now number 16, do you see how it's a y equals? That's a Hoy line. So it means it is a horizontal line with a 0 slope and a y-intercept of 5. And the next one, do you see how it's an x equals? That is a Vux line. It is a vertical line with an undefined slope and an x equals, so there is no y-intercept, so there's no b. Number 18, the slope would be 4, and the y-intercept would be 0. All right. So for these ones, you need to identify the slope and the y-intercept, and then you're going to plot. So let's do some of them together, and then you guys can wrap it up. So your slope is 2, and your y-intercept is at -3. Now if I want a y point, remember I have to put 0 in the front. So I'm going to plot this at 0, -3, and then I'm going to move my slope of up to right 1. So up to right 1, up to right 1, up to right 1, up to right 1, and draw a nice pretty straight line. And you can see from my slope is positive, and so is my line. For number 20, my slope is 1/2. My y-intercept is 2. Remember 0, 2 for y-intercept. 0 comes where the x point is. So 0, 2. And then I'm going to rise 1, run 2, rise 1 over 2, rise 1 over 2. So I can do here and here. Draw a nice pretty straight line. And then the last one I'm going to do with you, my slope is -2, 3. Y-intercept is at +5, so the point's really 0 and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go down to right 3. Down to right 3, down to, oh, I can't go right 3. So just down to right 3, and that's all I have. And draw a nice pretty straight line. Okay, you try the last 3 that are on this page, and then you're done. And here are your answers for those 3. Please let your teacher know if you have any questions.